What is up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos. I'm your host, Bales, and this video is for Thursday, November 18th. We have a smaller 6-game slate that is still just littered with injury news. Some of it we know, a lot of it we don't know, so kind of going to be a bit weird at this point of who's going to play, who's not going to. The last time I did a video, I asked you guys to predict Jalen Brunson's points. I can't give a winner. The game just started. I think he has 2 points in the first 6 minutes or something like that, but I'd be willing to bet he gets going at some point in time. They only have 8 points total. So, I mean, I guess for this video, go ahead and comment below how many points you believe. Let's go with something a little bit weirder. How many points do you believe Pascal Siakam will have against the Utah Jazz tonight? He's only played in 4 games. He's played big minutes in 2 of them. He scored 25 and 20 in those 2, where he played 35 plus minutes. So let me know in the comments how many points you believe Pascal Siakam is going to score tonight. And let's see if anyone can hit the nail on the head. Also, if you enjoy this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can obviously leave any comments that you have below, ask any questions. I will always be there to answer them throughout the day, and it'll give us a little more time as this is a later 7:30 start time. That's Eastern time as well, instead of the normal 7 o'clock. But to get through the injury news, starting it off, Spencer Dinwiddie has essentially been ruled out for rest. Davis Bertans also will continue to miss time. Bam Adebayo is questionable. Kyle Lowry, who sat out last night for rest, is probable. And then Markieff Morris has also been moved up to questionable for this game as well. Jimmy Butler obviously played last night, so he should be good to go. For Golden State, Andre Iguodala has already been ruled out. Stephen Curry is questionable with a hip contusion, though, so that is a key piece of injury news. And then another one comes for Cleveland. Kevin Love returned last night. He only played 21 minutes. They said that he was going to be on a strict minutes restriction. The big thing, I guess, is it looks like he's going to play tonight. Nothing's been confirmed, and obviously we've seen weirder things than guys that are returning getting ruled out on the second half of back-to-back, especially someone like Kevin Love, who obviously has been around for quite some time. Evan Mobley, obviously continuing to miss quite a bit of time. He's not going to be back really anytime soon. But Lauri Markkanen, Lamar Stevens, and Jarrett Allen are all questionable. I feel like the easiest one to return to a full role would be Jarrett Allen, who only missed a little bit of time with an illness. Lauri Markkanen has been out for quite some time because of their protocols, and Lamar Stevenson has also been out for a little bit, but because of an ankle injury. So I feel like even if those two return, there's at least a little bit of a question as to whether they can play 30, 35 minutes. I feel like Markkanen, they might need him just based on who's healthy at the moment. So I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if they kind of just thrust him into bigger minutes because he's young. Jarrett Allen, though, if he is able to play, probably comes back and just plays normal minutes. For Los Angeles, Terrence Mann's questionable. Justice Winslow, Keon Johnson, Serge Ibaka, and Marcus Morris all ruled out. And then Nicholas Batum is doubtful for this game. So quite a bit going on there for the Clippers. Jakob Poeltl out once again for the Spurs. Josh Okogie out for Minnesota. Danny Green, Joel Embiid, Matisse Thybulle all ruled out. Zeke Nanji, Michael Porter Jr. both out for Denver on the other side. And then you have Will Barton, who is doubtful. I guess the other one that I should mention that is already taken off the injury report is Bones Hyland, who a lot of people like to use because he's been playing extremely well in limited minutes. He got injured in their last game, but completely off the injury report, so he should be good to go. OG Anunoby, Precious Achiuwa, and Chris Boucher, all questionable for Toronto. A lot going on there, and we're kind of going to need news specifically on Anunoby just to see what's kind of happening. But that will be big for the Toronto-Utah game. I guess the good news in this situation is that obviously Utah is a very solid defense, so Toronto's not really a team that we're looking to attack, even on only a 6-game slate. With that being said, you know, if Anunoby is out, there's going to be some value. Scotty Barnes obviously is going to take a jump up. But again, really tough matchup for the rookie. Don't necessarily love it. Do think that he's a reasonable option, though. Starting at point guard, there are a few plays that I do think make sense. If Stephen Curry's playing, 100% feel free to use him. He's up at almost 12,000 now, but he gets a great matchup against Cleveland, who's really struggled against point guards. I feel like he's probably the safest option just because of the way that this slate breaks down. Only 6 games. There's not a ton to go with. The other one that is expensive at this point, DeJounte Murray, 60 plus in each of his last 2. He's a triple-double threat. He nearly triple-doubled in both of those, missed by 1 assist in the one game. But he does get a good matchup against the Minnesota Wolves, so I really like DeJounte Murray at this point as well. As you continue down a little bit more, Tyrese Maxey, I would assume, gets back to very solid minutes. They had a weird game for Philly in their last game. It was just a massive blowout against Utah. Maxey even played 29 minutes in that game, but we saw like Andre Drummond, I believe, played less than 20. I think Tobias Harris also played in the high 20s as well, so that's a good spot. For him, Ricky Rubio is no longer a cheap option, but he's at least reasonable to play. The same with Darius Garland, although I do think that Rubio at this point is probably a little bit safer. Around the same price, Reggie Jackson's been playing extremely well. It's just that his price tag is up to $6,500, so you're not really getting any type of discount on him like you were by a few $100s in recent games. Moving down more, same game, I guess I could save him for shooting guard, but I'll just mention him now. Eric Bledsoe, similar to Reggie Jackson, his price tag is back up almost 6,000. It was down at essentially 4,000 at one point, but you know, he's locked into solid minutes. They're obviously dealing with quite a few injuries, so that is a solid spot. Still at under 6K in the matchup, I do believe you can use him. Patrick Beverley continues to be a guy that you can use for cheap. He's only 4,200. Not necessarily the best per minute player, but as long as he's playing, 30 plus minutes, it's tough to avoid him just because he can drop the 20 fantasy points easily in that time. As you move down, Gary Payton II is an interesting option. He's playing well on a per minute basis. He's just not getting minutes. I would prefer probably whoever's starting between Aaron Holiday or Raul Neto. I think that they're probably just going to continue to stick with Holiday, and he's still under 4,000. So that's probably my preferred option. He's going to be really popular, I would assume, as soon as he's mentioned as a starter. So great option there. Bradley Beal is interesting. He's coming off of a couple bad games, and now he gets a matchup in Miami. He's been worse on the road. The problem in this situation is that Miami's actually struggled quite a bit against shooting guards. So no one really is going to play a struggling Bradley Beal, right? And on a 6-game slate, you kind of need to do something to get different in tournaments. And Bradley Beal comes with significantly more upside than 9,400, what his price tag suggests. So I do think that that's a really good option. Moving down a bit, there's not necessarily too many options that I love. I think that obviously Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell both come with upside. They're both priced relatively high at this point, but I do think that both are very solid. Cedi Osman, for whatever reason, played less than 20 minutes last night. Really tough to kind of predict what the Cavs are going to do, especially not knowing their rotation. So at 6,100, that's probably a pretty hard pass just because he's so reliant on scoring. Shake Milton, I do think at 5K is a little bit too cheap. If he's in the starting lineup, we should expect 30 plus minutes, and that's going to be a really good spot. So I do believe that he's a very solid option. We just should really at this point wait for word onto whether he's starting or not. And then Luke Kennard should be locked into solid minutes. Doesn't always kind of produce in the offense. He's relatively tentative at times. But we've seen when his shots falling, he's willing to take them, and he does come with quite a bit of upside, especially for 4,400. And we do know that he will be on the court just because they're dealing with so many injuries. And I feel like that's just a really good spot. As you continue down, the guy that obviously should be outlined would be Bones Highland, especially if Will Barton is out for this game. He's performed well. Only needed 23 and 21 minutes to score 32 and 30 fantasy points. In his last game, he wasn't exactly playing overly well, but he only got to play 11 minutes before he got injured, taken out. Assuming he's back and healthy, which obviously he's not even on the injury report at this point, he's probably going to end up being relatively popular just for the pure upside and price tag. I do think that that is a very solid spot for him, though. So I probably will have him as one of my higher ranked shooting guards or small forwards at this point. Paul George gets a great matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies. My only concern is that obviously now Dillon Brooks is back, so while Memphis has struggled against small forwards throughout the season, they could literally just put Dillon Brooks on Paul George. No matter what position he's playing, really, they could just shift everyone around because they have that type of rotation to the point where Dillon Brooks will be guarding Paul George. So I do think that he's a relatively fine play, but for 11,000, I think it's risky. He's probably not the top option that I would go to if you're spending up, but I do think he's at least viable. If Bam Adebayo is out, I would much rather prefer Jimmy Butler, who returned last night and looked extremely good in that matchup. So I do think that he's the better option for 1,500 cheaper. As you continue down, I think the guy that sticks out the most would have to be Dillon Brooks. Not necessarily a great matchup, and he only played 21 minutes in his last game, but that was a complete blowout. The big thing is that he's taking a ton of shots regardless of the amount of time that he's on the court. So 26 minutes in his first game back, 17 shots, then 31 minutes, 18 shots, 23 minutes, 14 shots. So assuming he gets 30 plus minutes, which we can project in a good matchup against the Clippers, you know, he should be sitting probably slightly under or around that 20 shot mark for this game. And I think that's a really good spot for only 6,000. As the season progresses, we'll probably see his price tag shoot up a little bit more just because there's a lot that he can do on the court. He has a lot of steal potential as well. So Dillon Brooks really sticks out at this point. Outside of that, at small forward, you know, you have Luke Kennard, who I think is relatively obvious. You have someone like Georges Niang, who's only 3,900. He played 30 minutes in the last game, but relatively difficult to trust the Sixers rotation at the moment. That's probably more or less where I'm looking. Probably don't really want to drop below Luke Kennard. I don't honestly really want to drop below Dillon Brooks on the slate, but at least there's viable options there. Below Kennard, not really anyone that I necessarily want to use. If everyone's out for Cleveland again, I think that Dean Wade's fine just because he's going to get so many minutes. But excluding last night, really, it's not like he does all that much while on the court. So you're kind of playing with fire in that type of a situation. As you move to power forward, I think at the top, Tobias Harris is relatively fine. Coming off of a bad game, I wouldn't necessarily expect Philly to consistently get blown out to the point where Tobias Harris doesn't play 30 plus minutes. Obviously comes with quite a bit of upside with Joel Embiid still out, so he's kind of leading the offense. I do think that he's completely viable on the slate. Not necessarily my favorite play or anything, but this isn't really a slate where there's a lot of players that I'm in love with, so you're going to kind of have to pick and choose. If Anunoby is out, I would like to see what Toronto's running. If Pascal Siakam moves from center to power forward, I think he's very viable at under 8,000. If he's playing center, though, not necessarily sure I want to use him in this type of a matchup. I think his rebounds would be really limited. He probably would have to stay completely out of the paint with Rudy Gobert down there. So kind of depends on what happens there. But if Siakam is starting at power forward, I do think that he's a really good option under 8K. You can use a guy like Kyle Kuzma, who comes with upside, but with Bradley Beal back in the lineup, a lot of risk involved in that type of thing. Jaren Jackson Jr. continues to be underpriced, but he also continues to be a relatively risky option, and a lot of that has to do with some foul trouble, but he can put up fantasy points in a hurry, and it's kind of a limited slate, so there's only so much you can do. Thad Young is up there in price, but I mean, in the limited minutes, he's kind of just sitting in the mid-20s at this point. He does have roughly 40 fantasy put upside, so I think that he's fine. Keldon Johnson is another guy for the Spurs that I have no problems with you playing, but Thad Young is a bit cheaper. I think that they have similar upside. I think it's more likely that Keldon Johnson hits that ceiling versus Thad Young. But at the same time, I do believe that both are completely viable options. Kyle Anderson is kind of a guy that I am always at least willing to play. I don't necessarily love him. But again, we're just kind of in a situation where you're looking for cheaper upside, and Kyle Anderson is the type of player that does come with quite a bit of upside for a relatively low price tag still. It's not like he's over 5K or anything. His inconsistencies have really kept his price tag quite a bit low. If he's starting and there's really no minutes limit, I guess I should say, Lauri Markkanen at 5,200 will become a lock in basically everyone's lineups. Really easy play. But that also assumes that he's starting and isn't going to deal with the minutes restriction. So kind of just waiting on that news, I guess, before we can really do all that much. And that's the first game at 7:30, so we should get that news well beforehand. As we move to center, Nikolajokich, 100% viable in all leagues. He gets a great matchup against Philly, who obviously will be without Joel Embiid, who's one of the better defensive centers. Instead, they will be playing Andre Drummond, who is an elite rebounder. Not very good defensively, though. So I 100%, if you're paying up, would try to get to Nikolajokich. It's a pretty big dump off after him. I do think that in tournaments, Andre Drummond's viable. People probably see that he only played 12 minutes in his last game, scored 18 fantasy points, but complete blowout. He didn't look good from the jump. I don't know. The fantasy point per minute production's still there. I think you can use him against Jokic. They don't really have anyone else that's going to be able to slow him down. They just don't have any size. So Andre Drummond at 8,200, now that his price tag's down a little bit more, does make sense. Rudy Gobert is in a similar spot where Toronto just doesn't have the size to slow him down, regardless of basically anyone that they throw out at center. They're not going to have the size to slow him down. One of the big issues that I could see here is them running Pascal Siakam at center, and then either one pulls Gobert out from the paint. He loses rebounding opportunities, block opportunities, all that stuff that actually does give him upside. Or two, Utah just goes small. We've seen them at times go small where Gobert's only played minutes in the mid-20s. Doesn't usually happen. They kind of like his size down there, but it's definitely something that you have to worry a little bit about. If Jarrett Allen's back, he's 100% viable on this slate against Golden State. In a similar spot, they don't really have too many guys that are going to stop him. I guess if they want to go with like Looney to try to match up size for size. But I don't really expect Looney to be able to slow him down. As you move down a little bit, I think a player like Ivica Zubac will end up being popular. He's only 5,100, played 31 minutes in his last game. He was kind of seeing somewhat of limited minutes before that, but gets a really good matchup against Memphis. So assuming, I guess we can't really assume his minutes because they're kind of up in the air, and we more or less know that he's going to start. I guess the big thing is that so many guys are out that they probably do play Zubac 30-plus minutes. I think regardless, he's a good play for 5,100. I don't think that he necessarily needs 30 minutes to hit value, but we're kind of waiting on a little bit of other stuff. If Bam Adebayo's out, obviously the chalk will then move to Dwayne Dedmon. We're just kind of waiting on what happens in Toronto here. So center is one of more of the up in the air positions at this point, but that about does it for the smaller 6-game slate. Still was quite a bit to go over. If you're wondering what I'm looking at, I have my headphones all oddly tangled up and they keep hitting me weird, and I was wondering what it was, and then I tried to untangle them. Didn't work whatsoever. But thank you again for watching, especially if you watch these podcasts every day. I know we put them out quite a bit. I should be on for Friday as well, and then we will have Tristan Sriracha take over for the next 3, and then I will be back. But that about does it for tonight. If you have any questions, comments, please drop them below. I'll answer them throughout the day. Go ahead and post how many points you believe Pascal Siakam. I actually forgot who I said. Pascal Siakam will score tonight against Utah. And until then, I will see you guys later. Good luck tonight.